This morning, we're so fortunate to have with us Pat Furlong joining us for our next session on building a game plan. She almost, of course, needs no introduction, but she's here to share all she has learned in her journey fighting Duchenne muscular dystrophy. As the founding parent project for muscular dystrophy in 1994, really intending to change the course of research for this devastating disease and press for a cure. She is widely regarded as the foremost authority on Duchenne's in the world. And this morning she's going to share with us her experience. We'll benefit from what she has learned in this journey in planning for success. She'll walk away with practical steps and guidance that help you look ahead and identify your goals to help you accomplish all that you need to do and focus it on attaining your goals. So please, this morning, help me welcome Pat Furlong.
Good morning. Well, I think we all go home, party's over, after Bonner. I think we know what to do, right? What an amazing speaker and what an amazing journey. So we're all here on a journey, and I guess I'm reminded by Bonner's talk about the Shawshank Redemption, right? Hope is a good thing, perhaps the best thing, because hope never dies. So all of us are on this journey. I am along on my own journey in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and I know that every time someone receives a diagnosis of someone they care about, the instant thought is, how do I get back to the life that I had, the plans that I wanted? 2 weeks ago, my nephew, one of my very favorite people in the world, out in Silicon Valley, 2 little girls, 47 years old, called and said, on a regular checkup, they found that I have pancreatic cancer. Now what? So we're on a journey in pancreatic cancer with Jeff. And he wrote me a note and said, I want to go back to the life I had. I want him to cut it out and then go back to the life I had. And I said, unfortunately, you're now in a world of rare disease, and you'll learn to smile again. And with a lot of luck, we'll keep you around a while. So nobody can go back, but we can all start a new beginning, and it can start today. So, if I get this right. So I'm really honored to be here. Thank you to Nicole and her team for inviting me to speak. It's really hard to follow Bonner, and I feel like those are really big shoes to fill. And now I'm going to talk to you about some practical things and some non-sexy things, but some really important things that we can do alone, together with others, that might and considerably will change the world. So this is my little friend. Her name is Grace Capeless. I work with her mother. Her mother is our COO for PPMD. Grace I attended her opening of The Lion King. She's Nala. She opened on Tuesday night, and it was pretty amazing. And after I saw Grace, I said to her, so Plan A seems to be Broadway for the last, after all, you're 11. So what's Plan B look like if this doesn't work? She's been in Matilda, Lion King, Christmas Carol. So this Plan A seems to be going pretty well with Grace. And she said to me, Plan B would be to help others. So I like that of an 11-year-old, and I'm really proud of her. This is me. Can you see me in there? In 1969, this is where I was. And my Plan A, I called my parents. I had graduated from Mount St. Joseph College in Cincinnati, Ohio. I had a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. I had a bachelor's degree in math. So I doubled major because I didn't get in nursing because I didn't apply to college I wanted to go away, and my German father said, you'll be in Cincinnati. So that caused a little delay in getting into nursing. So there I was, right in the back. I went to Woodstock. I went. I didn't tell my parents exactly where I was going because they really didn't approve of this idea. But shortly after the event, I went down to the city and stayed with a cousin, called my father, and said, I've decided to be in a rock band. So that was my Plan A. And in being in the rock band, I thought that would be, if people would discover me, of course, then I would be a movie star or something. So my father arrived by plane, you might imagine, the next day and said, you don't play a musical instrument. You can't sing worth a damn. You can't dance. And who is going to discover you and for what? So I joined him by plane and reassessed Plan A and got back to a different Plan A. So I went up to Ohio State and I got a master's degree in med-surg nursing. My specialty was whole organ transplantation. Back there in the 70s, we were doing heart transplants. That was the first. Then we went to kidneys. After that, in 72, there was a flu epidemic. And in my ICU, I had people with flu who didn't survive. One of the things that I noticed going into the ICU and running it that very first day was our statistics were that 80% of the people wouldn't make it out of my ICU. Not from the transplants, and certainly not when we had the flu epidemic and switched over. And on the wall of that door was that people who cared about the people who were in my ICU were able to visit with them 5 minutes on the hour for 4 hours in a day, 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, because we didn't want them in our way, right? So what we were saying to those patients who were dying is that you get 20 minutes to say goodbye. And I hated it, hated it. And I knew that we were wrong because we were focused on diseases and illnesses without focusing on patients. And I caused a little bit of a revolt at Ohio State University Hospital, and we completely revised how we did things. So this was me in 1984. Roll forward, I had had a career and came into Middletown, Ohio, which is a small rural community. Used to be the home of Armco Steel. Now Armco Steel has moved out and changed its face many, many times, although we still have the mill there. My husband, Tom, is a family practice doc. He had been elected president of the medical staff. We thought that was pretty exciting. I had passed the MedCat because all of my children were potty trained, and we agreed together, Tom and I, that once they were potty trained, I could go to medical school if I passed the MedCat. And I think he was a little iffy on whether I passed it. I passed it, and that was in May of '84. Jenny, the blonde in the back with the red sweater and red white sweater, was 10. Michelle, to her or your right, or is that left? My right, your left, was 8. Christopher, with his mouth and the little sly smile, was 6. And Patrick, sitting in the middle of Tom and I on our very formal picture, was 4. No one wanted their picture taken. We had to do this formal portrait for the hospital, and we were all really grumpy about it, so we tried our best to unsmile, smile. That was May. In June of 1984, after complaining and expressing real concern about how these 2 little boys were moving, they weren't moving very well. They couldn't do the steps. They couldn't jump. They sat and colored while my neighborhood kids ran around and did crazy stuff. And so I convinced myself that I was the best mother with the most well-behaved children, or something was dreadfully wrong here, because that husband of mine played football for Notre Dame as a defensive end, and they were going to be as big as he was, 6'3" and 220 pounds. And they were big boys, but they weren't moving. And so on that day, that Christopher finally, someone listened to me, and he had a little injury. I took him in to see a friend of ours, an orthopedic surgeon, who said, Christopher has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. What does Patrick look like? I said, 2 years younger, the same body type, and he said, then you have 2. So I rattled my brain and said, now, I went through pediatrics, but I admit that I closed my eyes because I didn't think children should get sick, and certainly not my children, because I only wanted to deal with adults. And he said, here's what happens in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. You will find that you're going to walk very much alone, but you're going to need to walk with people together because you're going to be in an environment where you have to walk with people. And Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a disease that is a progressive, debilitating disease, and your sons will not live to be 20. And in between there, they're going to lose the ability to walk. They're not going to move their arms. They're not going to breathe, and they're going to die. And so on Tuesday, this Tuesday, the 29th, Christopher will be gone 20 years. So it's been quite a journey. So what did I do? I went out and borrowed $100,000. That wasn't a good conversation with my husband, but I borrowed it because I said to him, listen, I passed that MedCat. I think I can cure this disease. And he was like, right. I don't think you can. And I said, no, I can. I absolutely can. So he didn't believe me. It's not true. They're not here. I couldn't cure Duchenne muscular dystrophy, certainly not alone. But what I did do is I started up a foundation called PPMD, or Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. The name isn't creative for a whole lot of reasons, because back then we were just parents, and being not creative, and you already know with no talent whatsoever, based on my father's comments, I said we're just parents, so we'll be parents, and this is muscular dystrophy, and so the name isn't very creative. So when you start an organization, what do? What happens? What can you do? What do you need to think about? What questions do you need to ask? And what you want is a direct line to treatment or cure, right? So my $100,000, if you ask what I really wanted, I wanted more time. I wanted them to be preserved in their ability that day, then and there. I didn't care that they walked awkwardly. I didn't care that they didn't jump. I didn't care that they'd never run or never run down Notre Dame's football. I never cared. I just wanted more time. So when you start a rare disease organization, you have challenges. What are you going to do? What's your mission? What do you want to do? And the answer is I want to cure, but to get there isn't simple and it's not straightforward. So is this one single disease, or is this multiple diseases across the spectrum? In Duchenne muscular dystrophy, you're liable to hear this on a diagnosis. He might be mild, moderate, or severe. He might have intermediate Duchenne. He might have mild, moderate, or severe Becker. What is it? What does that mean? Is that one disease, multiple diseases? So you have to think through what is the definition of the disease you're looking at, because it's complicated. It's really complicated. What about research? Is it just a matter of finding the right smart person in the right lab to do the right thing, to look at the right animal, to deliver that animal, and to deliver a treatment or cure? I don't know about you, but mice don't really resemble people very well, and often they don't predict what will happen in people. So do you support the quality of life? Do you begin to think about using medical tools to preserve what's there? And how do you do that? How do you measure it? You're going to need to look at outcomes. You're going to need to know, how are you going to measure? What's the sensitive measure that you're going to be able to say statistically, this child is being better or doing better than it was expected? That means you're going to be involved in clinical trials. That means you're going to be involved in a regulatory agenda. And then what about your organization? Do you have capacity to do that? Who's doing it? What kind of capability and skill sets do they have to do all those things? It can't be a one-man show. Where's the money? And one of the most crazy things that always happened to me and still does is, why don't you just call Oprah? Maybe you should just call Obama. Maybe after he gets out of office, he'll have enough money as well. So it's that, and you wish it was that easy, but financial sources are hard, and how to allocate them are hard. And then the stakeholders, the community, because you feel pretty alone at diagnosis, and then you realize there's a whole world out there of people, but sometimes they don't think exactly like you think. So stakeholders, what do they need? What do they want? What are their priorities? And partnering, what can you do together? What can you do alone? What can you leverage? How can you leverage more money? Who do you partner with? When do you partner? What do you expect from that partner? So there's all sorts of questions you have to ask yourself as you try to seek success. So then you ask yourself questions about your disease. Is that disease characterized? Where is it on this journey? When we started in Duchenne muscular dystrophy in 1984, when my boys were diagnosed, we didn't have a gene. We didn't have a protein product. I ran around pretending to be a postdoc so that I could go into labs and ask them, what was the reality here? What do you know? Where's your money? How much is happening here? And I found that there wasn't very much money, and there was a real emphasis to try to clone the gene. And once the gene was cloned in '86 and the protein product identified, I think the world went to sleep. Like, well, we did that, so let's do something else now. So again, where's the money? Where are the patients? Are they the same or different? Are all of these patients the same? Can we predict that all boys with Duchenne will go off their feet at the age of 10? No, we can't. Mine went off at 8. Some kids are going off earlier, and some kids are walking much later. So these patients are not the same. What are the trajectory? How can we predict it? Should we capture patient data? We've done that through a registry we call Duchenne Connect. It's been up and running since 2006. We have 4,000 patients in that registry, 70% in the US, 30% ex-US, and we're beginning portals in other countries so that we can get the collective or aggregate data and look at this patient population. What about the community? How will you engage with them? Clearly, there are ways these days in social networking. I think that it's pretty amazing that people record minute by minute their lives on Facebook and Instagram and all other things, while others are very private and don't record those kinds of things. And what about patient engagement with regulatory agencies in the area of PFDD? And if you're from Washington, everything's an acronym, so that means patient-focused drug development. And keep in mind, there are no definitions of patient-focused drug development. We all have a different interpretation of what that is. And how do you tell your story and state your case? And when do you do it? And to whom do you do it? And how do you get to preferences? What are priorities of the caregivers? Are they the same or different of the patients? So these are things you're going to need to know, and we developed a draft guidance around there just to kind of think through those things. So what's the model that you want to create? Who do you want to be when you grow up? I'm reminded of Mrs. Robinson and, I can't remember the movie, what? And The Graduate, right? The Graduate, when they said plastics. Well, today it's personalized medicine. So what kind of a foundation do you want to become? So do you want to provide support? And none of them are wrong. All of them are good, and all of them contribute to a whole, because if we all did the same thing, then it wouldn't be useful. And I don't know of anyone with a couple of $1 billion hanging around their living room to be able to do it all. I just haven't seen that. So do you want to provide support for patients? They certainly need it. They certainly need hope. They need support. As you know, navigating this insurance, the insurance system these days are crazy. In Duchenne muscular dystrophy, it's hard to get a wheelchair with a standing apparatus when we know that standing really improves the whole body function, maintains the integrity of the spine, helps the respiratory system. But insurers don't think that that's necessary because, after all, they're not walking. So why would we want them to stand? But insurers will cover a stander so that you can stand the patients in a stander, which is an extra piece of equipment that costs more than the wheelchair with a stander. So who knew, right? Research. Is this basic science? Do you need a good idea? Is this a disease without anything? So you have a gene, perhaps? You know the molecular basis of the disease, but you don't know what happens downstream because of that particular genetic mutation? Clinical research, surveillance, how many people have it, who are they, where do they live, what do they look like, data collection. So all of these things you can do as an organization that are meaningful and useful and important. You can have a specific focus. Some organizations focus on gene therapy, some of them on stem cells, some of them on a particular area of research that is interesting or important to them for a variety of reasons. And I think that's terrific. There's venture philanthropy out there, that is investing in compounds or companies and taking a piece of that business so that you can generate an income should those get to approval, and then have an investment portfolio in other things. Some are comprehensive. They look at it like a race, and they invest in research and advocacy, care, and education. And look at all those 4 pillars and say, what can we do? You can have a hybrid. You can mix it all up and make up your own thing and do whatever you would like to do. And you have to know that in research, not all things are sexy. It's wonderful to say, I just invested in XYZ compound and I think it's going to be magic. But in order for that compound to get to be approved, we need to understand biomarkers. We need to do clinical trials, support for clinical trials. We may need a disease progression model so that we can stratify for trials, figure out who should go into the trial, or on the other side, analyze the trial to see if there was a subset of people that responded to this compound and maybe another one didn't. And then understand why that happened. So there's models. And then the business of foundation. Where's the money? It's always where's the money, right? And I don't think Oprah's line is open very well. And who runs the business of this? Who sets the strategy? How do you know it's a good strategy? Who tells you that it's a good strategy? Who defines the metrics? Do you evaluate it? Do you know? Do you invest in something and then look specifically and say, was that a wise investment? I can tell you that in about 2000, 1999 or 2000, the idea of antisense oligonucleotides or exon skipping was coming into the forefront. It was a crazy idea, and animal models looked very interesting. So we thought, all right, there are 2 labs that are very interested in it. One was in Australia, one was in the Netherlands. We hired a business manager by the name of Arthur Holden out of Chicago, and we said, we are going to bring the whole community together and make one company. And it's going to be just a love fest. Well, it wasn't. It was $250,000. We had about 8 meetings. They were led by Nick Wells out of the UK. Arthur Holden managed the project. And at the end of the day, the report came back that the timing is wrong, that they're in no position for you to join GSK up with the Dutch, up with the Australians, and make a love fest. That's not going to fly. So not all investments pay off. And timing is really, really important. And then how do you sustain the business model? So if you make some money this year, are you going to make the same money next year? And also, if there's a founder of an organization, will that model sustain over time? Did you build it to last? Do you want it to last? Or does it go away with you, the founder? PPMD won't go away. with me, the founder. PPMD is going to be built to last. I think that's a commitment, because it is. And when you start a foundation, it's your baby, right? It's the thing that you know most about, that you know intimately, that you have ideas about where it should go, why it should go there, how you're thinking about it. Based on your experience, you have to be willing to give that baby away and give it to others to lead. So you broaden that organization so it can serve the needs of the patient community that you care most about. So there are stakeholders. There's academics, there's government, there's patient and families, and there's pharma. And we're all in this together. This is an ecosystem that we all need to think about how we can work together. So, and there are partners of collaborations that we do with the government. So we have to think about these platforms and think about where does it make sense and when does it make sense. And there are also then umbrella organizations like this amazing Global Genes. There's also NORD, National Organization of Rare Disease. There's also the Genetic Alliance, EUARDIS. There's lots of people. And what can you use? What can you take? What can you share of your own with these organizations so that we can move forward in the rare disease arena on things that we can work together on that make sense? Policy is one of them. Faster cures you're hearing about. This is a policy for all of us. So it means all of us should be working on those kinds of things. Then there's things that are disease specific. So you have to know where the advantages are and where the disadvantages are. So the umbrella organizations raise awareness. February 28th, I'm sure you know, is Rare Disease Day. It's a day for us to celebrate. And clearly, rare disease, since Abby Myers in the 80s, pioneered that legislation about rare disease, which resulted in the legislation and the Office of Rare Disease, and continues today through the NIH and others. We've come of age this year, and in the years before and the years after. Rare disease is front and foremost for many of the pharmaceutical companies. It wasn't true 20 years ago. So umbrella organizations do policy. Incentives for research and development. They do healthcare, they do disability, they do position statements, and they have platforms for grassroots support. So these are organizations we need to support because they support the things in the legislation that is going to directly affect what we do, how our patients get and navigate through approvals and drugs and access those therapies that are going to come online. So the umbrella organizations are helpful. They are really helpful from beginning to end through the development process, the drug development process, from trials through reimbursement and everything in between. So they can help, they can be advisors and guides. They offer also patient assistance programs. So sometimes you just have difficulty accessing something. Some of them are medication specific, some of them may have more general information. So when people need access, this is a good place to start. It may not be the ultimate place you land, but it's certainly a good place to start. So there are challenges in all of our organizations, every single one of them. For the umbrella organizations, they're spread thin. They also don't know much about your particular disease, so you can't go to them and say, are you going to be an expert in Duchenne muscular dystrophy? The answer is no. And sometimes they have to manage their conflict of interest. We all do. But they have benefits. They have a broad mission. They can leverage across many diseases. They can have a bigger impact in terms of policy. So we have to recognize that and utilize them. Even government can be helpful. My father would have said no, but government is very helpful. There's NIH, there's RAID, there's TREND, there's grants that are available to really move the drug development forward. The FDA programs, the fast track, the accelerated approval, breakthrough designation, these are all really important tools for the rare disease community, and they help us get to approvals faster. Newborn screening is important because I think we know in the rare disease community, if we identify patients earlier, then we can intervene earlier and the outcomes might be different. The landscape dramatically changed. PROCORI, patient-centered outcomes research initiatives, PROCORI, and we are happy and lucky to be a patient-powered research network, having received our second grant for Duchenne Connect. So Duchenne Connect is with PROCORI, Patient-Powered Research Network. It is combined with Geisinger Health and on the platform Research Crossroads. And soon we will be offering CareSync to many of the patients in our Duchenne Connect registry. So CareSync is able, and I'm not technologically able, but what I understand what it'll do is you identify 7 providers and it'll reach in and get those medical records and connect them with your patient-reported outcomes. So a way to look at big data and look really deeply at these patients as we collect data and understand their trajectory, what's important to them, how they access therapies, and what those outcomes will be over time. So government organizations also challenges. They're also financially constrained, they're competitive, and they're slow. And I think we have to just recognize that. There's no way to speed up the NIH, right? It's a process. It's a process. Although it brings credibility. NIH grants are real credibility to the process. So, and there are bigger financial resources at the NIH. So they offer grants of lots of money, 50,000 to several million, depending on what system you've gone into. And they also are quite aware of how to leverage across diseases. So these are real advantages when you're thinking about, what do I do next? How do I do it? How can I do it better? How can I take a small amount of money and leverage it into much larger money? So we've done this a number of times. We funded Imaging DMD, which is a group in Florida that started out to ask the question, could we image the quadriceps muscle? And in imaging the quadriceps muscle of boys with Duchenne, could we predict when they'll go off their feet? Could we understand whether an intervention is helpful or not? Could we ask some of those basic questions? So they came to us for $250,000, and we said, okay, you start this, get some data, go for an NIH grant. I'm happy to say they were just awarded the second in a series of NIH grants. It is much bigger money. It's now a 4-site study, natural history study of MRI, and soon they'll be able to predict the trajectory of the disease based on MRI and some of the biomarkers that we've all worked on. So I think that this is it. How do you leverage? How do you build upon small money or smaller money and get more bang for your buck? So academic researchers are going to be helpful as well, and physicians are helpful as well. Sometimes not so helpful, but many times very helpful. So I think that this is an important recognition of their partnership as well. They're going to know your disease, so that's the good thing. They have expertise in model systems, so you can ask them, rather than building yourself a zoo with a mouse and a dog and a monkey and a gorilla model, you can say, what's the best model? And in the mice models, what's the best model in particular for my disease state? Those clinicians have access to patients. They also are involved in steering committees and data safety monitoring boards of companies so that they can look at this trajectory in terms of drug development across paths. They may not be able to talk to you about it as their members, but they certainly can share that experience in their head with some of your questions. They can support you in regulatory interactions and certainly support industry. They can provide testimony at advisory committee meetings, and as we all want to get to combination therapies, because I think we all sit here and know that there isn't a magic bullet right now for any one rare disease. It's unlikely in the nearby future, and so we're going to need to combine these therapies to really stop progression of a rare disease. So they also have challenges. Those academics and clinicians don't have much time. They're always pressed for time, and we know in the Duchenne world there are some of the clinical sites running 7 trials at once. Their regular clinical load, and then we call them for a question or serve on a committee, and they're like, sure, can we do it about 3 a.m. to 4 a.m., and I'm happy to talk to you then. So also you're dealing with an institution, right? And it's not about giving money to that particular lab to do a particular thing. That has to go through a whole series of processes within the institution, which can take time and cause a great deal of frustration. So, and they have experience with industry and can provide that insight. They can commit to you, they can work with you, they can provide insight and knowledge and guidance. And you too, as experts in the disease of interest, can provide your insight to them, which is the most meaningful when you combine patient-reported outcomes and clinical data, because that is a real, true picture of the patient you're looking at. So in rare disease, we're there. We're in this environment and we're in the center of it. And all of these stakeholders are going to help at some point along your journey. So it's not a journey of one, it's a journey of all of us together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things. We are one of those hybrids. We look at what we do in terms of pillars, race or care, however you want to spin that acronym, research, advocacy, care, and education. We also have a philanthropy model in that, or venture philanthropy model in that for the last 8 years, we provided support to a validation lab at the University of Pennsylvania. So the validation lab validated compounds from industry at no cost to industry, because sometimes young biotechs do not have the money to validate whatever it is they're looking at, whatever compound or biologic. So the lab at the University of Florida, or now the University of Pennsylvania, which has now moved to the University of Gainesville, Florida, is under the direction of Lee Sweeney. So we have We've done it a little bit under the table, so I can say that out loud now that he won't be fired from the University of Pennsylvania for listening to this. Tech transfer of universities takes time, sometimes 18 months to 2 years. We weren't really interested in wasting time, so we separated ourselves from the validation lab to some degree. We were not in the CDAs, so Lee was able to do the work, report generally back to us, and then we served with a licensing agreement with the companies. So in the past year, 10 companies were validated in that lab between Pennsylvania and now at Florida Gainesville. So we now have a different arrangement with him, similar in terms of how we invest, but he has the mouse colony and the dog colony and has significant resources to validate young companies, mature companies, public companies in a way that is fast and accurate and hopefully leads to more clinical trials and one day more treatments. So just to say what we did at the beginning, and when Bonner talked, and when he put up his little chart, are you delusional or a realistic optimist? I'll say delusional at the beginning, right? So I'll vote for delusional. We were looking all over the world to say, what's going on in this world of Duchenne? Can we find magic? And keep in mind, we wanted magic. So we heard in China that there was a neurologist who was delivering to her patients a concoction of tea. The boys would drink this tea 3 times a day. They would receive acupuncture 2 times a day. And these young men were walking longer. And keep in mind, this was early in the 90s. When steroids weren't used in Duchenne, boys were off their feet between 8 and 10 years old. And it was pretty horrible to watch. So if this person in China was giving a few more years, remember, save time, preserve function, we would go there. So we had some people go to China. We brought back the tea, which was a bag of stuff that included leaves and centipedes and bark and stuff. And you boiled that down, and then, of course, your sons would drink that, right? Because why wouldn't you? It smelled a little like mud. So our boys do lots of things for us. Our children do lots of things for us. But we wanted to know, what is this? And really, was it working? So my colleague Elizabeth Vroom, we had several parents from the US go over there and take part in a 3-month whatever. I'm not sure I could call it a clinical trial, but we'll just say thing. And then Elizabeth teamed up with some friends in Europe, and they went over there and took a look at what this was, to look under every rock. So Anthony Erdesbiria, a very old and good friend of ours, and Elizabeth Vroom and Jean-Claude Kaplan went over. They boiled down that tea, they analyzed the tea, and found plant-based steroids. So we were then further convinced that our use and recommendation of steroids for our boys were going to be useful, and in fact we could control the dose by using a pill like prednisone or deflazacort. But we did, in our delusions, chase down and continue to chase down everything under every rock until we get a yes or a no, because we believe that even a no is useful, right? Then you just go on to the next thing. So this is our strategy in PPMD. We fund opportunistic research, we engage in robust advocacy, we demand integrated care and education, and we engage our entire community. And I'm going to just show you a few examples of how we do it. So this is how we think. We think we should fill in the missing pieces, and not all of those missing pieces are sexy. In fact, some of them are kind of boring, but if you don't do it, then you can't get to the end game, which is treatments for all boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So a couple things that we look at now. This was empty when my boys were here. Treating Duchenne was nothing. When I said my sons have heart disease because I saw the fluid collection, nurses know fluid collection, the physician said to me I was crazy. When I said they're getting CO2 toxic at night, they said I was a worried mom. They died of heart failure and CO2 toxicity. So this was empty. Today, this is what it looks like. We not only are looking at opportunities to replace truncated form of dystrophin, we're looking at gene therapy to replace dystrophin with a company called Solid. We're also looking at utrophin replacement, alternate protein replacement like follistatin, and then looking at the whole downstream pathology of what happens when dystrophin is gone. And looking at this, we now have 27 companies that are investing in the space of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and today, 20 years later, more than a $5 billion investment in this disease. And in 1984, the investment was less than $5 million a year, collectively. So the world has changed for Duchenne. It has changed not just because of a single foundation or a single government entity or a single umbrella organization. It has changed because there are many people contributing to the whole and desiring change. So this is how we engage in the pipeline. And you can look at how we do discovery through post-market. We are looking at everything we can do in those spaces so that we can contribute to the whole. This is probably a better picture of it for you so you can see what we do. We see this as our space to look and be very nimble about what is the advantage, what is the opportunity, set out the strategy, and go after it. And once we set out a strategy, we are nonstop on moving on it. So this is a little bit about our registry. So Duchenne Connect is a registry. It was started in 2006 to collect patient-reported outcome. We wanted it to be robust. We wanted it to be meaningful, and we wanted it to be useful to the community. So this is a registry that has curated data. We have 2 genetic counselors, soon to be 3. We have a genetic testing program, so we offer free genetic testing. This is supported by 3 different companies. Free genetic testing to people who have barriers, whether those barriers are illegal, insurance, age, whatever. So we support that. We soon will open up for carrier testing because we think females need to understand what if they are carriers. And that's really important. So I'm going to go through these really rapidly. Duchenne Connect is both a patient-reported outcomes registry, and on the other side, there's a back end where researchers can go in and ask very specific questions. If they want lots of data, they have to come through our steering committee and write up a proposal to what they're looking for and why they're looking for it, and then that is approved or not. So patients can, when you get up in the middle of the night and say, is my son going to walk at 10 years old? How many kids are walking? You can go into this registry and ask that specific question, and it'll say 80% of those 4,000 kids, or what, are walking at 10. And here's the drugs that they're on. You can ask that same questions. So there's a profile. This contributes and is directly connected to care considerations, which is standards of care that was published in 2010 and is currently being updated by the Center for Disease Control. So this is our approach to looking at taking that Duchenne Connect data and morphing it over to care, because patients are voting with their feet and going to specific centers. They shouldn't have to. You should be able to receive optimal care in your neighborhood, or at least within about 250 miles. So we wanted to improve and standardize care and to ensure and give patients confidence that, in fact, good care is available at certain centers. So we developed an international team to create standards of care in terms of how to apply them, how to look at the metrics, and then we instituted our certification program. So this is an international process that is now being adopted in the UK. And this is just to improve and standardize care, give patients the confidence that where they're going has and is giving optimal care to their son, that they're getting the best care. Certification is important because it's a seal of approval, if you will, and we have a program now of 10 certified centers going to 20 by the end of this year, by the end of 2016, and that will morph into, this is the process by which we utilize the certification process, and we'll morph that now into a clinical, include clinical subspecialties, and soon we're going to be looking at a clinical trial network. This is where these centers are located. We have 17 more applications in process for the team to take a look at and decide whether or not those additional sites have sufficient clinical infrastructure and capability to become a certified center. So we want to improve and standardize clinical trials because we don't want clinical trials to fail because the care is variable. So this is going to morph into, or working with several companies to now morph this into a clinical trial network so that we know the criteria to be a clinical trial, what infrastructure, personnel, capacity you need in terms of institutional support, and then what you can do to become a clinical trial. So this is going to be a network, soon to be up and running network as we prepare what that process will be with our industry partners. We have 70 thought leaders to be working on this, and this will be initiated early next year. So here's policy, and I'll just go through this quickly. We've been in policy since 2000. We started writing to the government when we started, give us money, $40 million, fix Duchenne, do this. What we realized is our message wasn't consistent. So in 2001, we hired better known as lobbyists. We have the same lobbyists, Faegre B&D, out of Washington, D.C. That really helped us in terms of strategy, and we began following all the legislation, the regulatory legislation. So this is what we did in terms of our policy. In 2000, there was a hearing, 2001, about Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Our wonderful collaborators in Congress decided they'd have a hearing. That led to a bill that was introduced in the House and Senate called the MD Care Act in 2001. That bill was passed and signed into law in 2001, reauthorized in 8, reauthorized again in 14. We're directly involved in making sure this stays in place. It's not so sexy, but at the end of the day, this is $500 million investment on the part of the government to the muscular dystrophies, and of that, $250 million to Duchenne muscular dystrophy. That, next to the cloning of the gene, set the stage for where we are today. So, this is the Muscular Dystrophy Care Act. It has Wellstone Centers, which are centers of excellence. It has a research plan. It has CDC looking at standards of care and updating them. It has natural history studies, outcome measures, and we're standardizing outcome measures with CDC and collaborative partners. So this is the funding. It's incredible to be able to work in this environment and know that your voice counts in the government. I think in 1984, if you said you can get your voice heard at the US Congress, I might not have believed it. I'm a believer. So the muscular dystrophy care implementation is going down now with the standards of care being implemented and updated. We were heavily involved in FDASIA and PDUFA 5, and that led to our ongoing interactions with the FDA. We wanted to set a platform for the FDA, so we started with putting patients first. We looked at Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We looked through our lens into policy like breakthrough designation, accelerated approval, and said to ourselves, how does Duchenne look in that policy? We set the stage for a white paper which made recommendations about how to use those tools and encourage the use of the tools, encourage the use of conditional approval like they use in Europe. That wasn't well received, but we continue to pursue conditional approval. We think it's a really good opportunity. We also wanted to know preferences. What does our patient feel? How do they deal with preferences? What's important to them? What's most meaningful to them? We can talk about clinical outcomes, and that's great if you can walk faster or do steps better, but what does that mean in your life? What's meaningful? What does that change? So we looked at benefit risk assessments. The FDA was involved in this. Teresa Mullen's group was saying, how do we listen to the patients? You probably already know they picked 20 diseases to listen to the patients. Ours wasn't one of them. So we marched in there to say, how can we work with you so that you listen? So we did benefit risk. This was looking at community engagement. This was asking and assessing, what are your priorities? And out of our benefit risk pilot, we learned that the highest priority was what I paid $100,000 to do, slow the progression of the disease. And that ranked above extending the lifespan. So slowing progression of the disease, top priority in our benefit risk study, which is now going on to phase 2. And I'm happy to say we have just worked with several companies, and we are able to apply drug-specific information for those companies in terms of caregiver or patient preferences. So this data is incredibly important. We also have a tool about telling your story. All of us have a story, and it needs to be told. So this is a story that we need telling, and we collected about 200 of them and provided them to the FDA and to companies because they're meaningful and they give insight into a disease that most people will never have. So that preference study really led to us talking to the FDA about, you need to know more about Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Why don't you think about writing guidance? This is more about the preference study. You can see here that the long bar is slowing disease progression, and it ranks much higher than all the rest of them. So because I have 5 minutes, this is our patients are waiting. This is our benefit risk stories. 138 of them are in this book. So then, we told the FDA, we had and continue to have wonderful interactions with the FDA, and said, you need to know more about Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Why don't you consider writing a guidance? There's lots of companies here developing drugs. They could use a playbook to develop them so that they know the challenges and the opportunities, and the community can weigh in on those. And they said, no, we don't write guidance for rare diseases because there's 7,000 rare diseases. That's all we don't have the resources, we don't have the time, we don't have the capability, we can't just do it. So they said, why don't you write it? So you know how you say something, walk out the door and think, oh, what did I say? I said we'd write it. So I'm happy to say we organized with the HIV community because those people know how to write guidance and they are very scientific. We teamed up with ACT UP and we teamed up with AMFAR. We had Mark Kruger and Associates as a project manager. We had a steering committee, working groups, and engaged the entire community, whoever was willing to review this document, all 45 iterations of the document as it grew, and question it and comment on it. We're willing. So we had over 200 people involved in the development of this document. It was started with a policy forum in December of 13. The document was started in January. It was completed, all 45 versions, with a final document going to the FDA in June of 14. And I'm happy to say this is the guidance. What we used the patient voice for, it was a cover letter. This cover letter went to Dr. Woodcock and the whole Cedar Neurology Division that said patients want minimal exposure to placebo. They want patients throughout the trajectory of the illness to be included in the disease. They want you to weigh patient preferences. They want you to listen to what's meaningful in their lives. That's what patients want. And the guidance itself was a true, well-referenced document that was accepted in an open docket, set up for public comment for 30 days. It closed on October 6th. I'll never forget it. That's my son Patrick's birthday. I thought that was meaningful to him. I hope it was, and I hope he's smiling. And then, just in June, the FDA delivered us guidance. They used our document as a platform. They turned it around and delivered the first guidance in a rare disease, and it was Duchenne. So working with partners to say to yourself, what can you do? What can you leverage? Who do you need to work with? Who's your best partner? You can't do it alone, but we can do it together. So this is our stated preference work in the area of pulmonary. We were working with Santhera Pharmaceuticals. We found in a patient preference study directly in line with their particular drug that the highest preference in pulmonary outcomes is, some people thought, to be able to be comfortable in bed, to sleep all night. It isn't. It's the ability to cough. It's the ability to cough. They want their heart to keep pumping, and they want to be able to cough. Highest preference. That preference study will be included in the NDA that Santhera provides to the FDA. So we're now on phase 2 of benefit risk. The FDA has asked us to look at a broader group of caregivers, primarily parents, more than the pilot, so we're doing that. We're also looking at the patient preferences across the trajectory of the illness and comparing the caregiver preferences to those of their sons. So I guess it's the opinion of, is the parent's opinion and equation the same as or different than their sons? You know, you have to run the risk of knowing you might find something you don't think you're going to find. And we're willing to do that and provide it to the FDA. So the demands and benefits. Being a rare disease organization is highly collaborative. You have to work together. The outcomes inform advocacy all around. People are using our models for benefit risk. They're using our models for draft guidance. We're willing to help and talk about that. You need a large number to participate. It can't be just one person's guidance or one person's idea. That doesn't fly. So we can do more together than we can do alone. So our role as advocacy organizations is vital. We develop meaningful studies. We're good partners, give good interactions, and we can change the world. We have an advisory committee of now young adults. My sons didn't live. They died at 15 and 17. They could have never been on this advisory committee, and I'm happy to tell you today that we have young, wonderful adults advising us. Who knew that we would have those adults? And sometimes they say exactly what you don't want them to say. But after all, they're our children. So we're in newborn screening. We're working with lots of people. We will hopefully expand our pilot next year. We're working with all the right people to get that done, because the earlier we intervene, the better. This is newborn screening. This is our validation pilot. So we do set out an agenda, get a strategy, and laser focus to deliver that. So this is what we do. We're working on cures, and I'm out of time, but go into policy. Faster Cures is important legislation. It's gotten into this kind of lazy part where we're worried about it. So jump on that bandwagon. This is important legislation because it affects all of us. So at the end of the day, we're together. This was our rally on the Hill. It was a lot of fun to see all this red. So as a mom who lost 2 of her sons, which, as Bonner said, is the most difficult, I can say to you, even after 20 years, my chairs are still empty, but my fight is still on, because I think that every time I see a boy, every time I see a young waiter, I'm liable to tip him extra, because in my head I'm thinking, would Chris have done that? Would Patrick have done that? I just went horseback riding in Yellowstone. I think I was the oldest person on horseback riding. And the young Nate said, I'm an engineer, and then I gave it up, and I want to ride horses the rest of my life. And I thought, that Patrick would have done something just as crazy. So thank you for listening.